Hello and welcome to the Devonport Camera Club's Projected PI06 competition results. The competition was judged by Alan Bevan and the club thanks him for his detailed and informative assessments. The Projected PI06 competition received 29 colour and 19 monochrome entries. 5 colour entries were not accepted and so remain eligible for entry in future competitions. I can see why the cute little plover caught the photographer's eye. Unfortunately, there probably wasn't much time to adjust exposure or focus. As a result, the bird is not sufficiently sharp. It appears that the exposure of the bird may have been corrected in post, but some of the opening of the shadows appears to have bled onto the background, creating a distracting halo around the chick's head and rear. Think too about whether the brighter top band of green at the top of the image is needed. I think it would work better if that was cropped out entirely. The photographer has controlled the depth of field well, with the background nicely out of focus. This photograph certainly has visual impact. Well done to the photographer for creating the star trails effect so well. I also applaud the decision to light the cabin. Unfortunately, there are serious perspective issues that spoil the image. The cabin is badly distorted, presumably a consequence of using a wide-angle lens pointing upwards. Also, the horizon is crooked. This is a significant flaw, as the sea horizon is always level. Whilst the horizon could be straightened easily enough, it will be more challenging to correct the cabin without distorting the symmetry of the star circles. All I can suggest to minimise the distortion of the cabin is to try cropping much of it away, perhaps all the way to the window on the left. Even then, there would be some residual distortion, but the impact would be much reduced. This photograph offers some visual drama with the energetic lines and colours. It is not evident what it is a picture of, but that is fine, as abstract images such as this don't need explanation. Visually, though, there are some jarring elements. The object in the bottom left corner seems unnecessary, as there is one centre bottom. The shadow that bisects the image is a shame. It seems to divide the photograph into 2 parts. Would it be improved with the right-hand side cropped away entirely through the centre of the shadow line? I think that would give the image a more pleasing balance and even allow the subject on the bottom to offer some sort of framing. This is a beautiful spot, and I can well understand why it has been chosen for a photograph. Having the person in the image works well too. It provides scale and focus point. A few things though to consider. Number 1, is there any more room above the mountaintop? If so, I'd allow just a bit more breathing room there. Number 2, the water is not level. It should be. Look at the ripples around the girl. Clearly the image needs to be dropped on the left-hand side to make them level. 3. The light is too contrasty. A golden hour shot would have been much better. Whilst waiting for the golden hour can't be done now, perhaps the impact of this overly contrasty light can be reduced a little by darkening the rock ledge, bottom right, and reducing the overall contrast a little. With a reverse tone curve, perhaps. This is an interesting scene, and it therefore holds the viewer's interest for a bit longer than usual. The photograph has a few problems, however. The two black spikes coming up from the bottom spoil the image. They should either be cropped out entirely or perhaps removed with careful post-processing, although that might be a bit tricky to achieve. Secondly, the top of the image is unhelpful. Again, I think it needs to be cropped away. With both crops done, the photograph is then unambiguously about the crabs and the repeated pattern of their walk. The final problem, though, is that many of the crabs are out of focus. The ones out of focus in the foreground will be removed if the spikes are cropped away, but there is not much that can be done about the ones at the back other than a pretty severe crop. Given that the image is about the crabs, it is important that they are all in focus. You certainly found an interesting subject for a photograph, but unfortunately, technique has let you down somewhat. 16 colour entries were accepted. What a privilege to see such an imposing bird. The camera has been positioned well so that the top half of the bird stands out dramatically against a clean sky background. There is a reasonable degree of feather detail to be seen, although the image would have been even more dramatic if that detail was even more pronounced. The all-important bird's eye appears to be sharp. Unfortunately, there is some haloing visible along the edges of the body, particularly visible next to the brown parts. The model in this image is well lit and posing in an attractive manner. The background is excellent, it gives the image depth, but is not distracting because of the grey colour and its simplicity. The model is well positioned against that background. Unfortunately, there is motion blur on her left hand, but I don't see that as a major flaw to the photograph. What is a concern, though, is that the image appears to be too heavily treated for noise, or is perhaps over-sharpened, or both. As a consequence, her face and hair have a plastic quality that looks unnatural. This is a startling image, with the robin's red breast set off dramatically against the plain background and contrasting with the blue of the trailer. Great detail in the bird's feathers also adds to the visual impact. There is an emotional impact too, created by the fragility of the bird contrasting with the hard metallic surrounds. Visually, I think there is too much of the trailer. The bottom part of the image pulls the eye away from the subject. I suggest cropping the bottom quarter of the image away. On the left, the post and handle are also an unfortunate distraction. In an open competition such as this, the handle could be removed entirely in post-processing, and the post could be cropped away. I think the image has the potential to be reworked as a real winner. Well captured. Panoramic images can be restful as the format is very stable when presented horizontally. The challenge with the format, though, is not to make the image so wide and short that it appears we are looking through a letterbox. The X-Pan format, 65 by 24, is very popular for good reason, but this image goes beyond that, and the crop really doesn't work. Try the 65 by 24 crop and see what you think. The arc of the shoreline is lovely, and there are some dramatic clouds over the headland, albeit rendered very tiny because of the crop. The background vegetation takes up a large percentage of the photograph, and unfortunately there is not much in it to hold attention. The brightness of the immediate foreground holds the eye too long. Consider toning down that quite a lot. Finally, consider the time of day when taking the landscape and seascape photographs. If it had been taken in the golden hour, the light would have been warmer and less contrasty. The blue bill of the duck is indeed an unusual sight, and it adds some visual impact to the image. I like the soft spotlight on the duck's back that makes it stand out against the dark background. It is a shame, though, that there wasn't more light on the bird's head and neck. The dark feathers around its neck lose some detail as a result. Be careful with water. It should always be flat in a situation like this, but here it is tilted up to the right slightly. This can easily be corrected in post-processing. Look for shots that add a bit more drama, such as water dripping from the beak, or flapping wings, or some other action that increases the visual interest of the image. These are visually interesting trees, an excellent choice for a photograph. The fact that there is a clump of 5 with space either side also works well. I like the fact that you haven't cropped the top of the tallest tree. It is a shame, though, that the branches on the left hand and right of the frame are cropped. It may be that this was necessary for reasons unseen, but the image would work better if there was separation all around. 2 other things to consider. Firstly, it is a pity that there is a hill of trees behind that become visually tangled with the subjects. If the camera had been lowered considerably, perhaps this hill would intrude far less. Secondly, the light seems very contrasty. A different time of day might address this. Well done to the photographer for getting down to the eye level of the echidna that works so much better than if the camera had been held at standing height and looking down. The echidna appears sharp and well lit. The use of the gentle vignette is a good idea. I like the fact that the surroundings are interesting too, not just a flat piece of ground. It is a shame that the dead leaves are so dominant in the image, and that the piece of bark, almost visually touching the animal's head, is a distraction. The rock in the centre foreground is also too bright. Darken it so that the viewer's attention goes to the animal. Nevertheless, there is much to like about this image. There is a lot to like about this image. The bird is sharp with good feather detail. It posed in the light just as the photographer would have wanted. It is a pity about the branch or tree trunk behind. This gives a cramped feeling to the image. In an open competition such as this, it is quite acceptable to replace that with blue sky. The only other problem is that the light looks quite strong and contrasty. A golden hour shot might have worked better, but I do understand that the bird would be unlikely to have waited on the spot for the golden hour. This is a very similar image to cider gum gathering, and my comments are similar. The light on this one is even more contrasty than the other, and this spoils the effect. Well done for getting separation on the left and top. It's a pity that you were unable to find a clean border on the right. The foreground is a bit untidy and becomes distracting. Might it have been possible to make a feature of some of these fallen branches to create a foreground interest? This certainly is a peaceful scene, as the title suggests. The panoramic format is very stable and adds to the sense of peace and calm. Odd numbers often work well, and the three boats and the reflection give a nice feeling of symmetry. That symmetry would have been even more impactful if the photographer had moved to the left to put the moon above the mast of the central boat and made the central boat the centre of the photograph. It would have been good to have moved closer to the water as well. That way the moon's reflection would not have been so tight to the edge of the lagoon, and the distracting bit of land at the bottom of the image could have been omitted. This is an image with a warm emotional impact. The two smiling faces are relaxed and happy, and that mood is conveyed to the viewer. The image is sharp and pleasantly lit. It is a pity that only one girl is looking at the camera. The older girl, looking off the camera, breaks that connection with her sister to a certain extent, and also is a barrier for the viewer. I'd consider cropping away the right so that none of that distracting doorway is showing. It becomes a much stronger image with that crop. This photograph is unambiguously about the beautiful sunlit mountain, as the title suggests. However, the mountain only takes up a small part of the image. I think a much tighter crop on the mountain would improve the image. As it is at the moment, the out-of-focus log, bottom left, is a distraction, and the triangle of sandy shore unnecessary. There is quite a lot on the right-hand side of the photograph that also adds very little. There is certainly a very pleasing image to be found here, but at present the impact is reduced by the inclusion of too much extraneous context. The layers of water, trees, mountains and then sky with clouds works well, giving the photograph wonderful potential. And the photographer certainly chose a wonderful time of day for this image. As a result, the light is beautiful. The immediate impact of this image is the extraordinary light. It feels possibly overdone, but then it is possible that it is a faithful recording of the scene. The photographer has provided foreground interest and a subject in the background, which is a fine compositional technique. I'm not sure the positioning of the reeds and tree in relation to each other is ideal. I'd be tempted to move the camera around a little to try to improve the placement of these compositional elements. The biggest problem with the image, though, is that the building is quite badly distorted. It looks as though it is falling backwards. That could probably be corrected in post-processing. As it is, however, I find the distortion to be a major distraction. Well done for trying a composition without sky. The colour of the telephone box is certainly eye-catching, and it is complemented well by the blue sky. Unfortunately, it has been necessary to include a lot of other elements that dilute the impact of these two vivid colours. The downpipe on the left and other detail below the window are a particular distraction. As it is, the image is not much more than a well-focused record of the box, albeit in pleasing light. Given the context, it is difficult to visualize a more artistic capture of the scene other than to say the left hand certainly needs to be removed. Perhaps a lower camera angle, perhaps at ground level, might have given the opportunity to include more of the sky and less street. The photographer has done well to freeze the action in this shot and given us a sharp image of the bird. I'm not sure that the downbeat of the wings is the most dramatic moment for a photograph, but it does have the advantage of showing off the wonderful feathers. My difficulties with this image are the background and the light. Ideally, we would want the background thrown completely out of focus so that it doesn't compete with the bird for attention. As it is, the grass below and the bushes behind are a little too intrusive in the image, and they reduce the impact of the bird. The light is very contrasty. I understand that the photographer probably had no choice to take the image at another time of day. Nevertheless, it remains the case that the image is spoiled by the overly contrasty light. While something of a photographic cliché, this shot has much to commend it. The exposure is excellent, the light and colours are lovely, the leading line is powerful and perspective square as it should be. But why has the decision been made to put the jetty off-centre and to instead include the background post on the right? The image cries out to have the right-hand side cropped away and the leading line to be made perfectly centered. The impact of this image is all about symmetry, and it needs to be exact. Well done with the timing of the shot to capture that bit of wave action to add foreground interest. And a final word about photographic clichés. They become clichés for a reason. They are terrific subjects for photographs. Two colour entries were highly commended. This image has a lot to commend it. The light is fabulous, the leading lines are strong, the fog provides separation. The colours and textures of the stonework are lovely. The reflection strengthens the leading line. One negative thought is that the destination of the leading lines is power lines. What a disappointment. The photograph definitely deserves some time invested to remove these lines. Otherwise, well done. There is much to like about this image. The photographer has caught the bird with lovely light on its torso. A fast shutter speed has ensured that there is no motion blur and the image is sharp. The background is non-obtrusive. I like the fact that the claws are exposed. It is a pity that the other wing is hidden. As it is, the feathers from the other wing that do show make the image slightly untidy. To lift an image such as this, some hint of context can add drama. The branch it has just left, for example. Also, consider the crop. Is all the blue space behind needed? I'd remove a bit. Nevertheless, the photographer can be well pleased with this shot. 4 colour entries were given a Merit Award. This is a really well composed image. The framing with the vegetation works well, as does the diagonal flow of water through the frame. The photographer's choice of shutter speed is excellent, giving a sense of motion in the water but retaining texture. Consider modelling the light a bit more in post-processing. At the moment, the foreground is brighter than the subject. Consider darkening the vegetation a little so that the viewer's attention is drawn more strongly to the waterfall. At present, the bright ferns compete for attention too much. A lovely image nevertheless. Well done. What a beautiful shot! The bird is posing in such a perfect way, the feathers and eye are sharp, and the light is lovely. The slight vignette is excellent, not overdone, but helps bring the viewer's eye to the bird. The background is pretty much out of focus, but to be picky, I think it is slightly distracting. If it had been rendered into a perfectly smooth out of focus area, this would be an improvement to my eye. Perhaps there are a few too many highlights in the background as well. In an open competition, it is quite acceptable to select the background and darken it just a little. Nevertheless, a photograph to be proud of. What a wonderful subject for a photograph. Focus and exposure are excellent. A couple of thoughts about the composition, however. Firstly, the background presents a challenge for the image as it is very busy and threatens to overpower the subject. It might be worth considering cropping away the top part of the photograph to remove the sky, which is currently peeking through the trees. With the sky removed, I think the background would become less intrusive. The other consideration is the foreground. I like the snow and rocks, but the rock at centre bottom is a visual annoyance and acts as a bit of a barrier. Crop that away, and I think the remaining rocks will provide a well-composed and balanced image. Despite these two comments, I think this is a lovely image. Well done. A great shot. The bird is sharp, the light not overly contrasty, the background beautifully rendered. The bird is making great eye contact with the photographer. I like the detail in the branches too. It's a pity that the bird is a bit tangled with the branches. Its left wing seems caught up somehow, making the pose a little awkward. I'd consider removing the left of the two twigs behind the bird. I think that would remove an unnecessary distraction and centre the bird in a more pleasing way. Nevertheless, well done. 2 colour entries were given an Honours Award. Fabulous! Beautiful detail in the feathers, lovely light, wonderful reflection. It's terrific too that the background is dark and out of focus, so it doesn't compete with the bird for our attention and gives separation of the subject. Perhaps consider darkening the light on the tree and moss just a tad, particularly at top of frame. Is the water flat? I feel like I want to pull the left-hand side down a touch. A great shot. This is beautifully sharp, the camera angle wonderful, the background really well thrown out of focus so that the fungi stand out proudly. A group of 3 works well, and the differing heights add to the visual aesthetic. A fabulous image. My only suggestions are, number 1, crop away maybe 20% of the image on the right. I think that would make the composition better balanced. And number 2, darken the bottom of the frame a little. This is a portfolio shot the photographer can take a great pride in. Well done. One monochrome entry was not accepted, and so remains eligible for entry in future competitions. Well done for experimenting with long exposure photography. You have flattened the water nicely, but you have kept the rest of the image beautifully sharp. As for the composition, I think the decision to include 2 sets of snags in the water is less than ideal, as the viewer doesn't know what the subject is. I find my eye wandering around looking for the subject and somewhere to rest. The biggest problem with this image, though, is the sensor dust spots in the sky. They are very distracting and render the image unacceptable in a competition. The good news, of course, is that they can very easily be removed. Keep experimenting with long exposure work. It can be very rewarding. 13 monochrome images were accepted. This photograph has an excellent control of tones from black through to white. It is sharp and the dog is making good eye contact with the photographer. Looking down at the dog does not offer the viewer much impact, as it is the angle to which we are most accustomed. Also, as a result of the camera angle, we have an unattractive background which spoils the image to some extent. There is a hint of over-sharpening. One ear up and the other ear down adds a bit of character to the image. Aloka is an attractive subject and she is posing well for the camera. The photographer has solved the problem of what to do with the hand quite well. The bokeh balls in the background are quite dramatic and add some punch to the image. The light falling on the girl's face is well managed. Unfortunately, the image doesn't appear sharp. There is very little detail in the skin or hair, which creates an unrealistic look. Perhaps it has been over-sharpened to compensate for not being properly in focus. Whatever the cause, the plastic appearance of the skin and hair spoils an otherwise successful image. This image conveys the story well, and the splashing water adds some drama. The out-of-focus background is well done. It provides context, but doesn't intrude. It is good that the man is engaging with the photographer, and therefore the viewer, but it is a real shame that the second person is looking away, with head almost obscured. This reduces the overall impact of the photograph considerably. There is much to like about this image. The diagonal composition gives some energy to the photograph. The subject appears to be engaging with the photographer and has a warm smile hidden under that glorious beard. There is a good range of tones from black through to white. The solid black background is excellent as it is completely unobtrusive. The photograph is possibly too contrasty though, and the eyes are a little too dark. The hint of what appears to be a microphone stand in front could be argued to provide some context, but I think it is more of a visual distraction than an asset for the image. This photograph is sharp and punchy, but perhaps a tad too contrasty. The image is unambiguously about the hut, but nevertheless a little more information about the context in which it is sitting might help. It needs some room to breathe. Think carefully about the camera angle. To my eye, the camera is a little too high, and I find looking down on the hut in this way to be less than ideal. The foreground of this image is sharp, the range of tones well handled. The real question, though, is to ask if the subject holds the viewer's attention. It doesn't have a great deal of impact to my eye, but that is a subjective comment. Details like this do sometimes make compelling imagery, and I'd encourage the photographer to keep experimenting. This is a pleasing image which conveys the character of the children to some extent and tells a story. I wonder if the photograph were to be rotated 90 degrees, whether that would help the slightly unsettling point of view. The children are presumably lying in the hammock horizontally, but the image has them upright. We appear to be looking at the boy in particular from underneath, which is a bit unsettling. It's hard to know what to do with arms and hands in an image like this. Nevertheless, it is sharp, well exposed, and has good tonal range. This image has a strong, albeit disturbing, story. It is sharp and has a good tonal range. The eye contact is powerful, almost confrontational. From a compositional perspective, I think it needs a little more space on the left and perhaps a little less on the right. The objects behind the man's head are also a distraction. Street photographer purists might be less concerned about the composition, with the story being the main consideration, but there is no obvious reason for the photographer not shifting their point of view to remove the distraction and consider their framing a little more. This is quite an interesting subject for a photograph. I wonder though if a colour version might not have been better. As it is, there are lots of greys and textures that seem undifferentiated, and the background becomes just as powerful as the subject. Think too about the composition. The ground around the old wagon is not important, but it commands a great deal of space in the image. Perhaps a lower camera angle might have removed the need to have so much uninteresting ground in the image. The image is sharp with a good tonal range and perhaps a little too contrasty. There is lots to look at in this image, but no single obvious subject. The eye wanders around a little uncertain about where to rest. The image is sharp and well exposed. The contrasty light might be a bit too contrasty, however. The bright foreground dirt is perhaps too dominant. Think about how distractions could be removed. Perhaps the camera could be positioned to hide that sign behind the truck. Perhaps the unsightly aerial could be left out of frame. Bisecting the old door on the bottom left border is a bit untidy, but then it would be hard to get a neat, contained composition in a chaotic scene such as this. I accept that the visual chaos is probably the story being told. This photograph has powerful symmetry and is quite minimalist in its subject. Well done for focusing the viewer on a detail rather than the whole ship. It's a pity that there is not a bit more detail in the metal, though. It looks possibly to have a little digital noise. Credit for thinking outside the square. The reflection of the building in the water and the leading line of the path work very well indeed. The drama in the sky is good also. Take care with the borders, they always matter. The tree on the right has been bisected, and that is unsettling. The biggest problem, though, is that the photograph appears to have been over-sharpened, to the point where the impact is more about the sharpening than the image. A good compositional eye is evident, though. This image has good tonal range and appears to have been captured in lovely light. The old building and that wonderful fence are good subjects, and the mountains behind are dramatic. Unfortunately, to my eye, the photograph appears rather squashed and perhaps cluttered. Bisecting the tree on the left border does not work. The house feels cramped. This is a wonderful subject for a photograph, but I would want to move around a little more, seeking a more pleasing composition. The fence looks like it could be used for a wonderful leading line. I wonder if the sky is really needed. One monochrome entry was highly commended. This is quite a lovely image, highlighting the benefit of monochrome treatment. The same subjects in colour looked overly contrasty, but in monochrome look sharp and dramatic. Well done in controlling the highlights and keeping detail in the shadow areas too. I basically like the composition, but that the branches of the little tree on the left of the image are just touching the border, and there is a bisected tree, albeit tiny, on the bottom right. These are minor details, but they can make the difference between a professional-looking image and one not entirely controlled. Nevertheless, well done. This is easily the best of the cider gum images presented. 2 monochrome entries were given a Merit Award. This photograph has some real punch, with a wonderful range of tones exceptionally well controlled. The blacks are true black, and there are great highlights without loss of any detail. The composition is excellent, and the sense of depth is really inviting. There is a strong sense of texture, particularly in the walls. The view through the gates is interesting, but perhaps might have been improved further if the photographer had waited for a figure to walk into the frame. A great shot. The light and texture on this man's face convey character well. By including the hat, feathers and the scarf, the photographer has conveyed something extra about the man. The background is well controlled. The man's eyes are a little unsettling, almost cross-eyed. I think the image would have more impact if he was engaged more directly with the camera. Great tonal range and a lovely monochrome. 2 monochrome entries were given an Honours Award. This is a terrific portrait. The lighting is good, the image sharp, the tight crop works well. There is a great range of tones from black through to white. The texture in the skin gives the subject a masculine, craggy look, which works well. A minor complaint is that he is not quite looking at the camera. It feels like he is looking at the viewer's left shoulder. Nevertheless, great work. This is a lovely portrait. There is good texture in the skin, and yet a feminine softness has been conveyed. Eye contact is compelling, the light well handled and flattering. The black background is terrific, and the framing is excellent. The photograph is sharp everywhere it needs to be. Great work. Alan Bevan is based in Adelaide, South Australia. He invites members to browse his website at alanbevan.com.